Exactly. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Very short.
Okay.
That's it.
You don't have to go back.
Perfect. Perfect. Can go over.
That's all right. I sent you a long one.
Perfect. Okay. So I introduced our keynote speaker, who is actually a very central keynote speaker for today because she is writing a lot and reasoning a lot around AI democratization. And it was funny enough because when I contacted you, we already had the call for papers out. And then I was discussing with the others of the team, and we read the paper that you wrote on AI democratization. And I swear, we did not go into it before writing the call for papers. It was so in line with the call for papers that I thought, this is literally the person we need to have at the conference. And she was in Oxford, so it was very close by. And I'm very happy you made it here today. So that's Elisabeth. She's a researcher at the Center for Governance on AI. And a research affiliate at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge. Elisabeth leads GovAI research streams on AI democratization, so very much on the topic, seeking to better understand what it means to democratize AI and how this understanding might be reflected in AI model publishing standards and on epistemic security. So it's investigating the impacts of emerging AI capabilities on how people produce, access, share, and appraise information. So now and today, she's going to speak about AI democratization more than model dissemination. And I leave the floor to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So yeah, today I will be talking about AI democratization with a specific emphasis on looking on how AI models are shared, how they're open sourced, largely because it's just a really hot topic of conversation right now and very closely related to discussions on AI democratization. So my work on AI democratization started as lots of work does, with frustration about how a term is not being defined properly. AI democratization, or democratizing AI, has been used by tech companies in the media to mean lots of different things, ranging from sharing a model to allowing more people to use an AI system. So these are just a few examples from Stability AI, Meta, Microsoft, and we'll go through some of these. As part of this project, I got together with a couple colleagues at GovAI and also Divya Siddharth of the Collective Intelligence Project and Aviva Vedya, and we wrote a paper, which I think several of you have read, on different kinds of AI democratization. And we outlined 4 different kinds: the democratization of AI development, of AI use, AI profits, and AI governance. I'll be focusing mostly on development today because I think that's where a lot of the interesting debate around model sharing is, but we'll also touch on the other 3 in the second half of the presentation. All right, so democratization of AI development. In the paper, we define democratization of AI development as helping a wider range of people contribute to AI design and development processes. So the couple examples, Stability AI, I think, is probably the earliest and most prominent example of a tech company using the term AI democratization in this way. So the CEO, Ahmad Mustaq, for example, would specifically when talking about wanting to share models and open source the model Stable Diffusion, would say, everyone needs to build an AI technology for themselves. It's something we want to enable because nobody knows what's best, for example, for the people in Vietnam besides the Vietnamese. Or he'd say, we trust the community as opposed to having a centralized, unelected entity control the most powerful technology in the world. So it's about getting more people involved in development processes so that they can contribute to the technology and build the technologies that they need. This is also the terminology being used by Meta as they're really getting behind this "we open source our technologies" dialogue, talking about democratizing access to large-scale models. Okay, so let's have a quick aside and talk a bit more about model sharing, specifically about open sourcing. So, quick primer, what does it mean when we talk about open sourcing AI? For the purposes of this presentation, I'll be talking about making AI models publicly available for anyone to study, build on, or modify. And when we can think of an AI model as approximately being constituted by the model weights plus architectural details, usually contained in the training code, there are so many more model components involved, and there's a lot of debate and discussion about how precisely open source AI should be defined. It's not as straightforward as the software context where the software code is either open or not. Anyway, so it's a complicated concept. This is what I mean. We're setting the licensing issues aside, which is another topic of discussion I'd be happy to discuss. A lot of people upset about the way that the term open sourcing is used with respect to AI because the licensing issues are often set to the side. But I'm going to do it regardless for the sake of simplicity. Okay, so the open sourcing debates kick off. As I mentioned before, this largely started with Stability AI and the release of Stable Diffusion. Really talk about how they want to open source this model, and there's a lot of concern about how the Stable Diffusion image generation model could be misused and safety filters could be bypassed if the model was open sourced, which we did see happen. But this is really where the debates around AI democratization and open sourcing really started to kick off. Then we saw Meta with Llama 2. Originally the weights were leaked for Llama 2, but then they really got behind this, no, we meant to do that dialogue, and really threw themselves behind this open sourcing, the goals around open sourcing and maintaining open source ecosystems. And then in response to that, we saw Google's open letter from employees that was released, talking about how, hey, maybe Google should be doing this open source thing too, because Meta's kind of cornering the market by doing this open source thing. And then in response to that, plus Meta's release, there were a bunch of protests outside of Meta saying don't open source. It's irreversible proliferation of dangerous capabilities. And then we're also seeing open source debates launch in the EU AI Act deliberations that are happening right now. So in the EU AI Act, there's lots of relevant articles and recitals. A lot of the debate right now that we're seeing is around whether or not foundation models should be regulated, but sort of couched within that is another debate around whether or not open source models should be regulated. So Articles 2 and Recitals 12 have this open source exemption. The idea is that if a model is put on the market, then it's the deployers of those models who should be responsible for making sure the model is safe. So if it's on a market, that would mean that it's not necessarily open source, it's being put into use. So an open source model, if all a model developer does is develop a model and then open source it, that doesn't count as being put on the market. So the exemption here would be that the open source model, if all it's done is it's made open source, is not subject to the regulations in the EU AI Act. However, there is an exception to the exception, which is about high-risk applications and foundation models. So this is in Article 28, which is largely the article that's under debate right now, is should there be this exemption for an exemption for foundation models? Basically what that would mean is that regardless of whether the foundation model is open source, it is the developer's responsibility to meet some sort of safety requirements and be held to the legislative requirements in the EU AI Act. Anyway, so lots of debate around open source, right from the terminology through current legislation that's being pushed through. And where does all this debate come from? Well, it comes from the fact that we really have to weigh the benefits and risks of open sourcing highly capable foundation models, because there really are genuine benefits and risks to open sourcing. So I like to start with the benefits, because oftentimes in these debates, people they usually just come straight down on the risks and talk about how terrible open sourcing is, but I think that that's a really naive way to do it because there are great benefits, and I like starting with them. Open sourcing has been the foundation of software development and technological development for the past 25, 30 years. The vast majority of the technology you use on a daily basis is probably grounded to some degree in open source software. So this has been really important for technological development. Open sourcing is important because it facilitates external oversight and transparency. You can see what companies are doing, what are they developing. Other people can monitor and see how the technology is being developed. It helps democratize model development and use. More people can be involved in the development processes. More people can benefit from using the technology and really help form them and tailor them to specific needs. There's arguments about open sourcing helping accelerate safety and capability research. You just have more brains, more people, more creativity on the project. you can really push forward some of these research streams in safety and capability. And then finally, it helps distribute governance and market control away from main tech producers. So get more people involved. You don't just have a monopoly by one or two companies. So these are all great open source benefits that we've seen with open source software, and there's good reason to believe that they will also transfer over to the AI development space as well. So open sourcing is great in the vast majority of cases. However, there are also risks to open sourcing, and these are risks that are associated with concerns about bypassing safeguards against misuse. So for example, in the stable diffusion example, the safety filters, especially in the first model of stable diffusion, could be deleted by just deleting a couple lines of inference code. So that's the code. It's a very short bit of code that basically just says this is how the model runs. And you could just delete the safety filters right out of that bit of inference code. That wouldn't have been possible if the model was just held behind an API and not made open source. There are different ways you can put safety filters in that are more or less difficult to delete. Sometimes you have to retrain a model, but this is an example. There's also concerns about perpetuation of safety vulnerabilities and flaws and dangerous behaviors downstream. So one of the great things about foundation models is that they are foundation models. They can be used and applied to so many different downstream applications. They can be built upon, but this means that if there's a flaw or a vulnerability in that foundation model that isn't addressed, and say it's a really critical safety flaw, that vulnerability, that one point of vulnerability could be disseminated to hundreds, if not thousands, of downstream applications. So of course, there's also concerns about dissemination of dangerous capabilities. If we start to see models evolve that have autonomous capabilities, self-replication capabilities that are highly persuasive, there's some people are very concerned about the dissemination of those capabilities into the wrong hands. But I think most importantly is that the decision to open source is an irreversible decision. Once you open source a model, it's out there. You cannot undo that decision. So think carefully about what the risks are before you open source the model. Okay, another quick aside on the US executive order. There are governments that, again, like the EUA Act, are taking these open sourcing risks and benefits really seriously. So section 4.6 of the US executive order is actually a call to do a deep dive investigation of the risks and benefits, specifically around the dissemination and free download of model weights. So something about in the next 270 days from this order we'll have done this giant project. Of course, it's never really made clear who's actually responsible for that project, so to be determined. But yeah, lots of rumblings around that, so I was glad to see that. Okay, so we've digressed on this conversation about open source model sharing for quite a while. And if anything, I think it illustrates a point that talking about model sharing and open sourcing is actually distracting from a much richer conversation about democratization. If you're understanding AI democratization just as model sharing, as it often is, you're missing a lot of key points. First of all, open sourcing is only one way to share models. So this is a chart from a paper by Irene Sullivan that talks about a model sharing spectrum. All the way on the left, we can see the fully closed models. These are proprietary models held within individual companies for their own research to build into their own products. All the way on the right, we have fully open models. These are models like Bloom and GPT-J, where everyone has access to all the model components, can download them for free, do whatever they want with them. And then in the middle, there's a whole bunch of options, like hosted access and API access, where you can access and query the model, but you don't have access to the weights and the architecture, or even downloadable models, where you can download the model, but first you go through some sort of check. You have to ask for it from the company, and then hopefully they will do something like check to make sure you're going to use it responsibly, or you're using it for research purposes or something. So a whole bunch of options. It's not a binary. All right, so open sourcing is only one way to share models. The second point, model sharing is only one way to democratize AI development. So we said democratization of AI development is about helping a wide range of people contribute to AI design and development processes. Here are a bunch of other things that help contribute to AI design, help people contribute to AI design and development processes. We have model sharing, that's definitely one of them, but we also had a great talk yesterday about compute access. You need large amounts of compute to train these models, so making compute access more readily available, either through cloud computing or by making models take less compute to train, is one way to help democratize development. Data access, you need the data to train on. Develop smaller, more efficient model versions that people can work with in order to get the same kind of capability and uses out of it. Project support and coordination, especially for bigger models, like in the development of the large language model Bloom. You need a lot of community support and organization to get that off the ground. Education and upskilling opportunities gives people more people the skills they need from more diverse communities to be able to contribute to these projects. Also improving technical infrastructure. You can't help build an AI system if you're needing basic things like network support and data storage. So building those kinds of things. And then also assistive tools. So the flip side to providing better education and upskilling opportunities is just make it easier to contribute to the development processes. So some companies like Microsoft, for example, are developing no-code tools and generative AI assistants like GitHub Copilot to help develop these systems and integrate them without having to have any coding experience. All right. So that's the first kind of democratization, the democratization of AI development. So we talked about how model sharing is one way to or open sourcing is one way to democratize, or open sourcing is one way to share models. Model sharing is one way to democratize development. Democratizing development is only one way to democratize AI. So now we will briefly run through the last three. Democratization of AI use, we define as making it easier for a wide range of people to use a technology. This is probably the meaning that Microsoft gets behind the most. They talk about how we're undertaking an ambitious effort to democratize AI, to take it from the ivory towers and make it accessible to all. Our goal is to infuse every application we interact with on any device at any point in time with intelligence. So their goal here is definitely not give everybody our AI systems to develop. It's very much on the let's get everyone to use our AI systems, and maybe we'll charge you for it too. But that's their notion of democratization they often use. So what are some of the goals of democratizing use? First is to distribute the benefit of the system. These systems can be fun. We've all played around with ChatGPT and image generators. They can also produce very valuable outputs, like they could be used in drug discovery, and they can be productivity aids, helping with coding or writing. Also, by by democratizing use, companies benefit because they can get a lot of feedback about how their models are being used, and this in turn can help them build better, safer AI systems. And here are a variety of methods for democratizing use. You can support services for integrating tools as sort of the same kind of no-code idea. You can have hosted or API access for your system, sort of like when you use ChatGPT, you're not accessing the model directly, but you're using an interface. And probably the vast majority of people who are ever going to interact with an AI system will interact through this kind of interface because it's easy. And that's how you're going to get most of the value from it. So having those intuitive interfaces is really important. And again, more fundamental infrastructure, things like network access, might also be key to ensuring that more people can benefit from using these technologies, integrating them into different work streams. Third, we have the democratization of AI profits. So this is about facilitating the broad and equitable distribution of value accrued to organizations that build and control advanced AI capabilities. The idea here is that, okay, let's not just have Google and Meta make billions upon billions of dollars from these systems, but let's share the love of it globally. So this is one use that the CTO of Microsoft, Kevin Scott, has alluded to, saying, I think we should have objectives around real democratization of technology. If the bulk of the value that gets created from AI accrues to a handful of companies in the West Coast of the United States, that's a failure. On the other hand, this is the CTO of Microsoft, so I'm not sure, might maybe take it with a grain of salt, but it is a use of the term AI democratization, and that's a good illustration. The CEO of DeepMind similarly said similar things. We believe that wealth generated by advanced AI technology should be redistributed. I think we need to make sure that the benefits accrue to as many people as possible, to all of humanity, ideally. So again, we can break down the goals and methods. Democratizing AI profits is important for easing financial burden of job loss to automation. So, these companies are going to make tons of money, and in the meantime, also put a bunch of people out of work. We need to have mechanisms in place to redistribute some of that money. It's a way labs can kind of demonstrate a commitment to developing AI for global benefit, or at least that's the way that you sell it to labs to get them to try to do this. It can help avoid widening a social economic divide between AI leading and lagging countries. We know that developing especially these cutting edge AI systems take an insane amount of compute and can be insanely expensive. Like, for example, we think that the next generation of GPT, so GPT-5, is probably going to take about $1 billion to train. Most countries in the world cannot get together $1 billion to train a system. So as much as we want to democratize AI and have as many countries be involved in these AI development processes, for many, it's just not realistic. So we also need to think about ways to distribute wealth beyond just getting more people to compete in the marketplace. And finally, it's about acknowledging human labor and creativity that underpins AI capabilities. People are the source of the writing, of the images, of the art that is used to train these models, and then these models continue to produce value again and again and again based off of this human effort. So how can we make sure that these people are compensated for their work, and not just compensated at that one point in time, but as AI models continue to generate value after that initial point in training? So some methods. Model sharing, I'm supposed to say model sharing, not just model kind of, but model sharing kind of. One way to democratize profits, give more people models to work with so that they can also be engaged in the space. Again, it depends what level of model we're talking about. Cutting edge, super big models, a lot of people will struggle to participate in this space. Then again, model sharing might be really important for smaller models that can be used for more narrow applications, and that might actually be where the vast majority of the economic value is. We could have taxation and redistribution schemes, something like a universal basic income. Philanthropic giving is also an option, maybe not too reliable, but an option. There's also something that's been talked about is a windfall clause, where companies will be obligated to donate windfall profits for redistribution. This is something like where if a company accrues money on the scale of, say, like an entire percentage of global world economic output, which is a huge amount of money. Like if they got that kind of windfall profit, then they should be obligated to redistribute that. And there's actually a couple really great papers about these like voluntary commitments to windfall clauses. A lot of people are signing up to them just because they don't think they will ever happen, but I think one day the joke might be on them. And then finally, having licensed data sets might be one mechanism by which we can pay people for their data, to put their data into licensed data sets that then can be used to train models. This is good for the people contributing the data because they get compensated for it, and it's good for the companies that want to train because they don't have to worry about the IP rights. Again, it's a little confusing about, okay, how do we move forward though and make sure people are continuously compensated? And this is something where maybe like a taxation redistribution scheme becomes really important. All right, and then finally, we have the democratization of AI governance. We define this as distributing influence over decisions about if, how, and by whom AI is governed. So there's some overarching goals here. With the first three kinds of democratization of AI, these have largely been about accessibility, figuring out who gets access to models to develop the models, who gets access to models to use them, and who gets access to profits. Democratizing AI governance is about balancing accessibility with other social values. And it's to ensure that these decisions about AI and accessibility to AI are reflected by the will and preferences of the people being impacted. So some goals of democratizing AI governance, primarily, is to reduce unilateral decision-making by big tech companies. And this is where I like to come back to that one quote from Ahmad Mostaq from Stability AI, who says the reason we're open sourcing is because we want to make sure that unilateral decision makers, unelected unilateral decision makers in big tech companies don't make all the decisions. So we're going to make this high impact decision without consulting anyone else to open source a model. And there's just a little bit of irony there. So the point of democratizing governance is to reduce this kind of unilateral decision making, take it out of the hands of individual unilateral decision makers at tech companies. It's also to distribute influence over the future of AI to wider, more diverse array of stakeholders. And then finally, to help navigate complex normative questions. Questions that will depend on what values we align to. So some of these complex normative questions are questions like those around open sourcing. Who should have access to these models? Who gets to make these decisions? And then there are a variety of methods we can use to help democratize AI governance. Again, model sharing, it finds its way into everything, but I think the important thing here is that it's not the only thing. Model sharing is one way to democratize governance because there can be more people involved in the development processes and making decisions about how the model is used. So we often see this if a model is donated to a foundation, like Linux Foundation, for example, where the foundation then has control. The foundation and the people contributing to that project have control over the model development, and it's not controlled by the single tech developer that initially donated that model. Can also implement democratic institutional structures into the AI companies. We can involve participatory processes to help make decisions about AI governance, both at the government level and within companies, and I'll give some examples of this shortly. And we could also have representative deliberation processes similar to the participatory processes. So just a few examples. The Collective Intelligence Project, which is run by Divya Siddharth and Saffron Huang, is doing some really great work with alignment assemblies. So this is bringing a bunch of people together to really deliberate on, well, a variety of questions. There's some examples, but lately they did one with Anthropic, I think, and they were talking about, okay, how do we decide what constitutions we use to train our constitutional AI? And let's have this be a community-wide project, get lots of people from different groups to really talk about, okay, what are these constitutions? Instead of just having a group of researchers from Anthropic say, well, I think these are the values that our AI system should be trained on. So Collective Intelligence Project is doing really great work with alignment assemblies and use the tool Polis often to make it more of a global discussion as opposed to just small groups. OpenAI launched their grant program for people studying how to have democratic inputs into decisions around AI value and value alignment as well. I don't really have any updates on how that's going now that I think about it. I helped write the initial call for applications, but I haven't had any updates. Anyway, they're trying. That's one thing. A while ago, Meta was also running some experiments around governance, and we're thinking of turning it towards AI decision-making as well. I think a main point here is that there's some good work being done, especially by groups like CAIP, and it's sort of being addressed by these larger companies being like, oh yeah, maybe we should get more wider community input into our decision-making about AI. But there isn't any really good structure around that. And I think it's important to also get this decision-making into higher levels in government as well. Anyway, I will conclude then with some take-home points from this presentation. The first one is that AI democratization is about so much more than model dissemination. It's not just about open sourcing, it's not just about model sharing, it's not even just about democratizing development. There's a whole bunch more involved. The second is that democratization is not inherently good, which we've heard some good talks about today from Nikhil and others. AI democratization is not inherently good because it depends why you're democratizing. It depends who's benefiting from that democratization and how those decisions about democratization are being made, which brings to the third point, democratization or democratizing AI governance takes precedence. It's about deciding how these decisions are made and involving and who gets to be involved in these decisions that makes decisions about AI democratization good. Decisions about how models are distributed, how access to profits are distributed, these kinds of questions derive their moral value from how well they align with the people who are being impacted, which is why democratizing AI governance should take precedence in these discussions. And with that, I'll conclude. Here are some useful sources if you want to read up on AI democratization and model sharing and open sourcing. I can also, it's totally fine if you want to ask for the slides, I can share this with you later. And then specifically on the open sourcing debates, I published this report with some colleagues at GovAI and a variety of other organizations on open sourcing risks and benefits, and it tries to give a well-balanced discussion of both the risks and benefits and alternative methods that we could use to try and achieve some of the benefits when the risks are high. So really driving home this message about open sourcing not being an all or nothing thing, and that if there is a will to engage with and pursue open source benefits, even where the risks are high, that we really can put our head down and try to achieve these in different ways. It's just that it might not be the straightforward answer of open everything up. Yeah, anyway, thank you very much, and happy to take questions and chat more.
Yeah, so your presentation, your first on models, basically. Yeah? But I would like to know if you think that this is enough, or maybe this process should be completed up with the democratization also of data, trading data. Well, as we were something speaking about when you talk about the democratization of AI benefit and profit, and we also need to have trading data to get this.
Yeah.
And there's also a discussion about the legal status of our data. They are property, they could be taken by everyone. There are fundamental rights that need to be protected in any case. All the other common rules that we can collect and make some kind of mechanism to be shared and controlled in the subscription stage.
Yeah, so absolutely. Part of this discussion is around democratizing data. Actually, I think this is a really great point because what it illustrates is that these discussions around democratizing AI, like it is so much broader than model sharing. And I know this presentation was largely couched around model sharing and talking about, it's not just about open sourcing. That's one way to model share. There's multiple ways to model share, and model sharing is one way to democratize development. And there's lots of different ways to democratize. There's also use and profits and benefits. But another entirely different aspect of this is it's also not just about models. It's about data. It's about compute infrastructure. It's about IP rights. It's about, it gets so much broader. And if anything, I think this really illustrates the point that when you have companies like Meta, like Stability AI, that are saying, oh, we're democratizing AI. See, we open sourced that thing. We're democratizing AI. That is such a shallow interpretation of democratization and a really unfortunate use of the term. If you're going to make claims to democratizing AI, I mean, maybe it's a hardline approach, but my instinct is, well, you better be engaging in all this other stuff and thinking about IP rights and data democratization and compute access. And yeah, there's just so much more involved. So yeah, it wasn't in this presentation, but that is another entire aspect of the discussion that needs to be addressed if you're going to make claims to democratization. Yes.
Thank you very much for the super interesting keynote. Obviously, we had a different approach because we were aiming at limiting models and not sharing them. So I'm interested in your thoughts about how can democratizing AI with all the methods you listed tackle the power asymmetries we already have? I mean, big data companies use publicly available data sets, the data set, etc. And all of the open source project and goals were not able to balance the power asymmetries and to compete against the big tech players. So from my legal point of view, I think we can only democratize AI via effective regulation, because otherwise I don't see how you can tie these positions of economic power with democratic processes, which are not effective regulation.
Absolutely. So getting there. I completely agree. I think this is why the democratization of governance is so important, because when you think about things like access to models, being able to participate in these market spaces, this is why democratization is not inherently good if democratization is just understood as improving accessibility, because just improving accessibility doesn't necessarily improve access to the benefits of AI, or to be able to engage and participate and benefit from that marketplace and engaging with the technology. So I think you're absolutely right in that legislation, governance, limitations sometimes are necessary to democratize the benefits of AI. And I think this is the idea that talked about on the very last slide, about why democratizing AI governance needs to take precedence, because the value of democratizing or providing access to a system is derived from how well that actually serves the values and needs and preferences of the people that are going to be impacted. And if just making a system accessible actually just like further entrenches the monopoly held by a couple companies, that's not actually in line with the values or the preferences of the vast majority of the population. So this might be a case where actually like democratizing governance and getting more people involved in the governance decisions about how AI systems are made accessible, how data is shared, and decisions about who gets to make these decisions about AI is going to be key to ensuring that AI is genuinely democratized in that sense. And oftentimes these decisions might be that we need to restrict access to a system. So I think that's another key point, is like different kinds of democratization can be in direct conflict with each other. Democratizing development can be in direct conflict with democratizing governance. If the democratized governance decision says, no, we have to limit access to that, well, that is in direct conflict with democratizing access for development. But that's why I say that democratizing governance in this case needs to take precedence. Yeah.
I really, sorry. And in terms of the societal and collective effects of AI models, I think there's a lot to the analogy with like air pollution from for instance, driving cars. Like, so the climate change increases through all our decisions to drive cars. And I would say that the technology of cars is fairly democratized in the sense of access, but also governance. Mm-hmm. And we do not see much success in having this democratized governance of car usage. We do not see a clear vector of protecting the climate, so of protecting the collective externality of all our individual decisions and opportunities to drive cars. Why would I expect that this works better in the case of AI?
I don't think it necessarily does. No, I mean, if it's a similar mechanism, I don't know if it'll work better. I think it depends on what mechanisms we put in place. So like in the case with legislation around cars, it's often made by governments, and then like the democratic input to those governments are usually who you vote for, and you have a representation. So a lot of discussion in the AI democratization debates is not just about how do we democratize access, but also like how could AI systems or technology help improve democracies, or maybe we should just improve democracy so that we can have better ways of making these decisions. So, for example, it's a lot of discussion, and this is also stuff the Collective Intelligence Project talks about, but it's having more fluid democracies. So this is a system where you could, instead of every person getting one vote, you could sort of allocate your vote to someone who you think is more expert on the system or in this area, and then they could allocate their vote, and you could do this on like every single issue. There's also like priority or ranking based voting, where like instead of, let's say you're voting for a president or something, instead of voting for one person, you actually, the way you vote is you rank your options from 1 to 20 or however many people are running. And what this does is like you get different numbers of points depending where you are in that ranking. And then it really does away with extremism in voting, because you'll be less likely to do the strategic voting. It's like, oh, I'm going to vote for this person because I don't actually like them. I just think that they're more likely to beat this other person that I really don't like. And so that kind of disappears. So I think there's just a lot of discussion around maybe like we're in a day and age where we have the technology and we have the wherewithal, we just need to change the way democracy works in order to have more clear vectors like you're talking about, so that like, the will of the people and the preferences of the people being impacted do more directly affect the decision making around the regulation of cars, around the regulation of AI, and so on and so forth. So I think that is the key area of discussion right there, is let's just fix democracy then. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I want to ask about the democratization of AI profits.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about redistributing the profit. And how do you think that would work? Because like a lot of big tech companies are profit driven. So how do you think that?
I mean, this is definitely kind of a reach for the stars type thing here, right? So if you want to talk about redistributing profits, there's kind of two ways to go about it. You let the companies get all their profit, and then you try and require them to give it away, which is difficult, or you just, you implement really hardcore taxation schemes. I think the other way is to just try and distribute power and influence away from a handful of companies in the first place. Try to make sure more people can be involved in this marketplace, more people, more companies from a more diverse array of countries. I think there's a lot of uncertainty here, though, because we don't know how AI is going to develop and where the most economically valuable AI systems are going to land. Is it going to be the super big, incredibly expensive to train models? Is that where the most economic value is going to be? Or are we going to find that yeah, they're marginally more capable than other systems, but these small, narrow AI systems are a lot cheaper to train and do the job well enough, and that's where the vast majority of economic value is going to be. Because if it's with the smaller systems, that's much easier to distribute and allow more people to engage in that development processes, and a lot more people can economically benefit from controlling those different systems in a competitive ecosystem. If all the economic value lies with these massive systems, there will only ever be a handful of companies or a handful of countries that have the economic power to actually engage in that cutting edge, in which case then we will need things in place like taxation redistribution schemes, mandatory windfall clauses, stuff like that to help redistribute those profits. And I think it's a little too early to tell right now. We might need a combination of them. But I think as much as possible, let's just prevent monopolies in the first place. Yeah, but it might be more of a reach for the stars type thing in the actual dissemination of profits. I think people have talked about universal basic income for a long time, and that's one of the main mechanisms that's being discussed is, this might, if AI really does produce as much value as some people say it's going to, that might be the only way we can fairly redistribute those profits so that we don't get this huge gap between AI leading and lagging nations that just worsens the socioeconomic divide that already exists. So I don't know, it depends what happens with AI.
I would have one question because it's more about the genealogy of the term. I'm not sure whether you know anything about it, but I was wondering why did it come to be termed AI democratization? In terms of when I think about AI democratization, I often think about the first association is democracy, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked a bit already about the appearance of the term. But then when we really go and look into several initiatives, it's either more about access. What is about increased agency, as you were saying, actually, sometimes it's increased use, right? Which is also different from agency. And I'm how did it come in the first term to become associated with democratization? Is it better than access or anything else?
Yeah, so I think that it actually leads quite naturally from the way the term democratization is used in technological development way before AI. I mean, there's just this idea of democratizing technology is making technology more accessible. That's just how the term is used. Or democratizing technology is technology that makes something else more accessible. So for example, we came up with 3D printers. 3D printers are a democratizing technology in that now anyone can print a handgun. I don't know, and so it democratized handguns because now anyone can print one. But we could also democratize access to the technology by making them easier, cheaper to have, to build, to use. So it's just the way the term has been used historically in technology, and so it kind of makes sense that now we start having AI systems. So talking about democratizing AI is talking about making AI more accessible. But I think it's because of the social impacts of AI at such a broad scale that the wider discussion around rights and involvement and governance has sort of piled in on top of it. So yeah, so I don't think it's that it was this rich medium and then people tried to make it simple. It was actually quite simple in terms of technology, and then we've layered in top of it. I also think the term democratization is problematic, as you said, because it has this link to democracy, which implies good things, which it doesn't necessarily have. So if all you want to talk about is making something more accessible, I wish people would just say we're making it more accessible.
Any questions? Okay, then thank you so much. Okay, now we have a break. We come back at 4:30, And we have first another paper session, and then we have Marta from Privacy Network speaking to us too.